So, a quick video about strength training versus hypertrophy. This is one thing that people mostly mix up with strength training and hypertrophy training. Strength training, you're training to basically recruit as much muscle fiber as possible, to be as efficient as possible. Now, you can gain strength without being efficient. Powerlifters aim to be efficient in their movement so that they can move the most amount of weight. We could argue that becoming more efficient is not necessarily becoming much stronger. They're just adjusting certain variables so that they can move more weights. For example, the bench press. A powerlifting bench press, they would aim to have a much wider grip. When they hold a bar, they aim to have the grip much more wider than how a normal person would train for hypertrophy with the bench press. So they would aim to have their grip much more wider. They would aim to have a big arch as much as possible, so the range of motion in order to touch their chest is much smaller, so they can move as much weight in order to win the competition. Strength training without efficiency. I would like to say that it's better to train for strength without being efficient. That way you get an overall strength. That way you could recruit as much muscle fiber. You're aiming to train your body to recruit as much muscle fiber. It's neurological training. And the best way to train this particular way is using very low reps. More specifically 1 rep maxes. People may say, okay, 1 rep maxes are only to train your strength, to test your strength. However, it actually trains your strength. This is a method known as the max effort method. Now, I've been using it, a lot of people have been using it, and they're getting results. However, you can still train with 2 rep maxes, 3 rep maxes. However, you don't even need to go to maxes to train that strength, to train that strength component. You can use singles. So use singles with your 90% weight, and you could train velocity, moving the bar as much as possible with, let's say, a sub-maximal weight in the 1 to 3 rep range. What I always find best is always good to try to push this max. That 1 rep max is always good. And what actually helps to train that strength as you move up to the 1 rep max is actually warm-ups beforehand. You're not going to go to the bench press, for example, and just add weights. You're not going to just go add weights. What you're going to need to do is going to work your way up. For example, you're going to start with 100 pound, 125, 150, 175, 200, then you're going to move up to your 225 until you do this until you reach your max weight. Now, hypertrophy training. Now, this aims to make the lift as inefficient as possible. That this hypertrophy training, you want to target muscles specifically. For example, you want to make sure that you're getting more out of less weight. You're not aiming to move the heaviest weight, but you're aiming to get the stimulus from the movement. That is the main goal. So hypertrophy training and strength training should work together. You get strong with the weight. As you increase your strength, it allows you to move more heavy weights to do your hypertrophy working. With that heavier weights, which is increased load, increased mechanical tension on your muscles, will cause the muscles to grow. So that's why it's good to train strength and hypertrophy together. With hypertrophy, you want to make your lifts as inefficient. You want to make sure that the exercise that you're doing is targeting the particular muscle that you're trying to target. It's like trying to do a bicep curl when you're just targeting your shoulders. Some people may swing the weights up when they're targeting their front delts. You want to make sure that the muscle you're training for hypertrophy to be the limiting muscle, the limiting factor of the lift. You want to make sure that muscle is doing the most of the work. So, even doing hypertrophy work, it's a form of strength training. You're still going to get strong. But it's more conducive doing higher rep ranges. It's more conducive towards hypertrophy. The higher rep range, you do 8 to 10 to 12 rep ranges. Not saying that 5 reps won't do it. you could play around with your rep ranges. However, both need to come together in order for an individual not to plateau. You need to do your strength work. When you gain strength, you will be able to move more weights in order to do more hypertrophy work with that weight. So yeah, strength training versus hypertrophy training. Use heavier weights, mostly like your 90% percentage weights, to train your strength. You want to train in your 1 to 3 rep ranges. Hypertrophy, you want to make sure you use movements that are, say, not so efficient. You want to make sure you get the stimulus for less load. It's what we call a stimulus to fatigue ratio. Every movement that we do, it produces fatigue, and it produces stimulus. So with hypertrophy, you want to use movements if you want to do it in the long run. If you want to do it for multiple sets, you're going to need to pick movements that are going to give you max amount of stimulus with the least amount of fatigue per movement. Make sure that that movement is targeting that muscle that you're trying to hit. That is hypertrophy training, right? So a lot of people, they mostly want to do just hypertrophy training without strength training, and for natural lifters, I would say that it is necessary to do strength training along with hypertrophy training. When people are confused when I say strength training, they think automatically what comes to their mind is powerlifting. No, strength training is anything. As strong as a particular movement is strength training. But it is more linked to doing compound movements. Why? Because it would be more beneficial and less injurious or less prone to injuries if you do it with compound movements. Because you're most likely, in order to train those muscle fibers, with max muscle fiber, you're going to want to use the 1 to 3 rep range. You want to use high percentage of your 1 rep max to train your strength, and it won't be the smart thing to train isolations with your 1 rep max. Hypertrophy training and strength training, they are both intertwined, because when you're training hypertrophy, you are still aiming to get stronger. You are definitely aiming to get stronger. Naturally, when muscle grow, you're going to get stronger. That's how it goes. So why do we separate? Why do we call it strength training and hypertrophy training? Well, I like to think about it this way. When you're doing strength training, which you're training in the 90s, in the terms of the percentage, you're using your 1 rep, 2 rep, 3 rep max. And this is the most optimal way to recruit those muscle fiber. And in that way, you're going to actually train yourself to move higher amount of weight. Train your body to recruit more fiber. That is what the strength training is. Hypertrophy training are basically any form of training that gives you time and attention. Any form of training that creates an environment for hypertrophy. You know, many methods work. People would be advocate for slow eccentric. People would be advocate for high intensity. Some people would be advocate for slow concentrics. It all works. It all works to varying degree. So it's basically time and attention. That's for hypertrophy, right? It's about creating an environment for hypertrophy, and the best way to, which is shown to create those environment, it's actually time and attention. Whether that's by slow eccentrics, slow concentrics, high reps, you name it. It mostly comes down a lot to time and attention, and that is why sometimes doing singles are not most conducive to hypertrophy, but they are good and necessary for you to train your body to activate all of those muscle fibers, allowing you to move maximal amount of weight, train your body to move more weights, and that eventually will move over to your hypertrophy training, because you'll be allowed to do those hypertrophy work with heavier weight, and that will add to mechanical tension, and that is also a primary drive of hypertrophy, because if you're not getting stronger, you're not going to get any bigger. If you're using that same weight that you've been using for a whole year, there's a high chance you're going to look the same. So that is strength training versus hypertrophy training. Make sure to do all two.